सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
We woke up this morning to a story from Washington, D.C. with the F word in the headline. Don't get me wrong, F word here stands for the F-16. Now, F-16 is an aircraft, is a fighter aircraft, as all of us know, that has been sort of painting very prominently on our radar screen when it comes to our tactical and strategic thinking for almost 40 years now. It's also an aircraft system, a fighter aircraft system, which in many ways defines the US-Pakistani relationship in the past 40 years, beginning in 1981, when the first agreement for the supply of the first few F-16s was signed between the Pakistanis and the Americans. At that time, it was done, as several times again in the past, because Pakistan was seen as an ally in another war. And then Pakistan was seen as an ally in the war against the Soviets who had invaded Afghanistan just a couple of years earlier. So because the Americans needed Pakistan's help in that war, the idea was, the justification was to give them the F-16s. So they will then be able to deal with the Soviet Air Force jets which were getting into their territory and bombing the Mujahideen camps. Now this story is played out in many different ways on two sides of the frontier. So let's leave it there. So this is a 42-year story that's gone on. In that story, the latest turn today was that the US government, the State Department, made a determination, as they say, which means they took a decision which they have now sent to US Congress for the final clearance, where they said that a 450 million upgrade, that's like a 4,000 crore Indian rupee upgrade for Pakistan's existing fleet of 75 F-16s had been sanctioned. Now, many of these are very old F-16s. The first ones in Pakistan came, if I remember correctly, in 1983. And then it has carried on. In fact, the first lot was delivered between 1983 and 1987. I will give you some detail in a minute, but you can also see this graphic on my screen. This is taken from F16.net, which talks about when each one of these blocks of aircraft was ordered, signed up for, and either delivered or mothballed because it could not be delivered given sanctions. And that is the reason I say, at various points of time, at some point the Americans saw Pakistan as an important ally and gave them more aircraft or more support for aircraft. And sometimes they saw Pakistan as trouble, so they withheld them. That's the reason I say F-16 also denotes history of Pakistan-US ties in the past 40 years. So you can see this list there. But importantly, this new decision of the State Department that allows a $450 million Pakistani request for some upgrades, repairs, spares, even things like manuals, brochures, etc., to upgrade their aircraft. In fact, the statement issued by Defense Security Cooperation Agency, and I'm sharing the full statement with you. You can see it on my screen. I will also share a link with you. You can read it. That says, it is a long list. I will not read the entire list for you. But among the more significant things that, they will allow Pakistan to pay for contractor engineering, technology and logistics services, structural integrity program, which means a lot of the aircraft are very old, so a structure needs repairs and upgrades and upkeep. Electronic combat and international security assistance program. These are programs that the US runs with many countries, the very many countries to whom it has sold the F-16. So Pakistan may have been out of it. This program of $450 million that Pakistanis wanted to work on their existing F-16s, that had been held back by Trump administration. That has now been allowed by the Biden administration. And then purchase of spares, accessories, and as I said earlier, publications, manuals, which are of technical nature. Now, what this means basically is that these old aircraft, most of these are very old, barring about less than 24 latest F-16s, that is Block 52 as these are called. Some of those were involved also in that skirmish of the LOC in Kashmir in February of 2019. So barring those, these are very old aircraft. So this means Pakistanis will be able to keep these aircraft in service for longer and more efficiently. The US statement also says quite clearly that this does not include any new capabilities, weapons and munitions, which is correct. This is no new missiles, no new radars, no new electronics, suites, pods as they are described, but maybe some electronic upgrades, etc. here and there. And it also says that this will not alter the military balance in the region. Now look at the Pakistani Air Force. First of all, F-16 is a very provocative thing in India, because in 1981, when the Pakistanis were to get it, India did not have a comparable system. And the truth to tell, at that point, the Soviets, who were our main suppliers, they did not have a comparable system. And it was at that time that in that tension and that alarm that Indira Gandhi then reached out to the French to order the Mirage 2000. So first Mirage 2000 order was finalized around that time, and the first planes came in, first Mirage 2000s came into Indian Air Force service about 6 to 7 years later. By 1987, the first lot of Pakistani F-16s was fully operational. That's when Mirage 2000 began coming in. In the interim, Indian Air Force then also reached out to the Soviets and found the one thing that the Soviets had to counter it, which was the MiG-29. So MiG-29s began coming into India. Now MiG-29s did not have some of the cutting edge technologies that say the F-16 had at that point. MiG-29, for example, did not have a fly-by-wire system. But given the missiles that the Russians had produced then, and they were nearly comparable with the American missiles, MiG-29 was a beautifully designed aircraft, great one for within visual range combat. And Indian Air Force then concluded that with the missiles that they had got, this MiG-29 was good enough to deal with the F-16. So once again, it was the Pakistani acquisition of the first F-16s which altered the balance in the air in Pakistan's favor, and IAF then restored it with the MiG-29s. And later with Mirage 2000s, as Mirage 2000s fully came into operation, the first squadrons were formed in Gwalior in late 1980s. In fact, if you go back to the old issues of India today, I had done a cover story, I think in 1988, if I remember correctly, on India's defense modernization. And the cover picture in that issue was a Mirage 2000. That cover picture was shot by my photographer colleague Bhavan Singh at Gwalior Air Force Base, where the first squadron, the 7th Squadron, Battle Axis of Indian Air Force, was coming up with Mirage 2000. So Mirage 2000s came in. That restored the balance because Mirage 2000s also brought in missiles with a very decent range. As that happened, Pakistan again worked with the Americans to get better systems for its F-16s to again shift the balance in its favor, and since then this tamasha has gone on. So as we figured, in February 2019, Pakistan was able to field at least some F-16s of the 52 block category. 52 block is the latest one that the Pakistanis acquired after the agreement they signed in 2013. With these, Pakistan was also given a bunch of AMRAAM missiles, about 500 AMRAAM missiles. Now, AMRAAM missiles are the ones which now altered the balance of power. These AMRAAM missiles, AMRAAM stands for Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missile. And apparently, it was one of these that shot down Wing Commander Abhinandan's aircraft, although there are still some hazy areas there. Was it shot down by an air-to-air missile? Was it shot down by a ground-to-air missile? There are still many hazy areas there, but Pakistanis gave credit to an F-16 pilot who fired an AMRAAM missile, and several of these missiles were fired also at the Sukhois, two Sukhois in what was called the Avenger formation, which then evaded it. But the fact is, it's that day Indian Air Force was reminded, it's not as if they didn't know it, that Pakistani Air Force, because of these F-16s, outranged them in their radar and also in their missiles. Now, since then, Indian Air Force has been trying to fix it. The new Astra missiles are coming in, which are domestically developed with Israeli cooperation, which is sort of comparable with AMRAAM, but also the new Rafales. Now, Rafales come with missiles, the Meteor and others, which are better than AMRAAM. So as that happens, chances are the Pakistanis will look for something else. So this race has gone on in the air. Now the fact is that sometimes our thinking tends to be too tactical. When two countries fight a war, it's not as if two air forces fight a war, or two navies fight each other, or two armies fight each other. It is the combined, total, comprehensive national effort of a country, Army, Navy, Air Force. But why is it that there's been so much excitement about aircraft, air forces, particularly this aircraft system, that is F-16? Now, partly it's because of 1965. We are currently going through the anniversary of the 1965 war. It was a 22-day war that began on, say, 3rd of September effectively. So we'll go on till September 25. And that is when Pakistanis made a very big deal of their air force, and that became a talking point. So Pakistanis always had American aircraft, so F-86 Sabre and F-104 Starfighter, against which India put up its Nats and also Hunters. And then all the stories were built on both sides. On the Pakistani side, on how F-86 and F-104 allegedly or supposedly devastated the Indian Air Force. On Indian side, on how brilliantly the tiny Nat became a saber killer. So all wars lead to mythologies. But in this case, the biggest mythologies were built around these aircraft, fighter aircraft systems. And since then, this trend has continued. F-16 came in with its own mystique. Until then, Pakistan had been starved of fresh Western equipment for quite some time, and India was way ahead of Pakistan. When the first F-16s came to Pakistan, it became so prominent in the Pakistani folklore that this became an integral part of Pakistani truck graffiti, if I may call it that. You know what's written behind trucks, Buri Nazar Wale Tera Muh Kala, Vagara Vagara. So they would also write F-16 behind their trucks. So F-16 became part of the folklore in Pakistan. In fact, there were many jokes also, including how Ziaul Haq calls a meeting of his commanders to watch a presentation on some new fighter aircraft he's buying. That fighter aircraft is nothing else but F-16. His air chief drops off to sleep in the middle of the presentation, and then he wakes up his air chief and he says, whatever his name was, maybe Iftikhar, what do you think in Punjabi? Ki sochte ho? Le liye F-16. And Iftikhar says, Sir, the corner plot in the Zarur le lo. So that's a joke on Pakistani generals and their love of prime plots of land in Islamabad. So jokes apart, this became very, very central, not just to the military folklore, but also to the way both countries, especially their air forces, began to assess their comparative strength. So again, if you see the list I just shared with you, you will see what is the checkered history of this aircraft. Some came in, there were 4 programs to begin with, Peacekeep 1, 2, 3, 4. The first 6 were delivered at Fort Worth on 6th of October 1982. January 15, 1983, the first F-16 came into Pakistan. And then many were used also on the Afghan frontier. And if I read F16.net, and if that is accurate, which I think it is, it then mentions that at least 8 mostly Afghan-flown Soviet-built aircraft were shot down by Pakistani F-16s in that area. All of these, by the way, were attack aircraft. They were not air-to-air combat aircraft. They were attack aircraft. So there was MiG-23, there were some Sukhoi 22s. There were also some helicopters, and maybe one Sukhoi 25, which is a slow-moving ground attack or counter-insurgency aircraft. In those battles, the Pakistanis also lost at least one F-16, though later it came out, I don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing, in 1987, that F-16 was an own goal. It was shot down by a Pakistani pilot using a Sidewinder missile. So the pilot of this aircraft was then Flight Lieutenant Shahid Sikandar Khan, who fortunately for him survived. He ejected, but he was shot down apparently by his senior, probably squadron commander. It was a case of fratricide. So once again, you can imagine how history may have gone. So Pakistanis got a bunch of these. They got the first program until 1987. And then fears rose that Pakistan was getting very close to a nuclear weapon. Remember that story that Pakistan was one turn of the screwdriver away from getting the bomb. And that's when stories also came in that Pakistan had got almost a ready bomb and the trigger mechanism from the Chinese. And that's when Pressler Amendment came in US Congress, which barred the delivery of further F-16s to Pakistan. So at one point, Pakistan bought 28 F-16s, the delivery of which was blocked. Pakistan had already paid a bunch of money. In fact, no less than $658 million at that point. That money was paid in advance, but the Americans kept those planes back. Now, there's a fascinating story. If you read this F16.net article, I will not repeat it here. It will take too long. On how Americans kept on keeping these planes alive until they were sent to the boneyard. Because Pakistanis said, either give us the planes or give us our money back. Americans said, okay, we'll try and hawk the planes to somebody else and give you the money back. We can't just take money out of someplace else. So first, the Indonesians agreed to buy these, but then they reneged. They went back. Then the New Zealanders agreed to buy these, but government changed in New Zealand and new government's military priorities were different. Finally, what did the Americans do? They decided to use these aircraft in their aggressor squadron. Aggressor squadron is in a training, somebody comes in to attack and you go in defense. So these became part of the American aggressor squadron. Meanwhile, 9/11 took place. So Pakistan went through a freeze with America. 9/11 took place. Then Pakistan again suddenly became a stalwart ally. As Pakistan became a stalwart ally, again Americans decided that they had to give Pakistanis something. And once again it came to F-16s. And that carried on for some time. 2005, there was a fresh agreement. Once again, Indian diplomacy got into the act, and once again there were blockages at US Congress. So not much could be delivered. But after 2013, some good aircraft were delivered. This is the Block 52. But also more importantly, 500 copies of the AMRAAM missile were delivered. That AMRAAM missile again altered the tactical, not strategic, the tactical balance in the air. Now, tactical balance means if you have one short skirmish like you had after Balakot, this makes a big difference. If, God forbid, you have a full-fledged war, then the combined muscle of the other side, which is India in this case, will be overwhelming. That is a different thing because Pakistan has too few F-16s and too few AMRAAMs for that matter. Pakistan has all of 75 F-16s of various types right now. And the number of 75 has also been reached after they bought a bunch of second-hand Jordanian Air Force F-16s. Otherwise, Pakistan is short of these aircraft. If you look at Pakistan Air Force's remaining inventory, that is very old. The only other modern aircraft the Pakistanis have, they have 75 F-16s. They have 134 JF-17s or JF-17 Thunder as it's called, which they built in partnership with the Chinese. Now that plane's in big trouble right now as we speak. And as I read on international aviation media, it looks like a bulk of that fleet, if not the entire fleet, is grounded right now. Why? Because it's built, JF-17 Thunder is built on a Russian engine that the Chinese bought, and as usual, the Chinese reverse engineered it and tried to modify it. Right now, that engine's giving trouble. Russians are not able to give servicing support or spares. So that fleet, 134 aircraft for a small air force like Pakistan, being more or less ineffective is a big setback. Besides that, the Pakistanis have aircraft systems going back to the 60s, 80 Mirage 3s and about 70 to 90, depending on how many are serviceable at any point of time, 70 to 90 Mirage 5s. These go back to the late 60s. So for the Pakistanis, those 75 F-16s really matter. For Indian Air Force, in a full-fledged war, this is not something that they worry about too much. They can deal with it. But in a short skirmish someplace, which happens at beyond visual range, Indian Air Force still, unless they are able to get a Rafale up there in the same theater, they are at a disadvantage. But you know what? The advantage lies in these cases with the side that sets up the skirmish. For example, post Balakot, Pakistan Air Force had set up that skirmish, which they called Operation Swift Resort. So at that moment, there wasn't enough time for Indian Air Force to actually come at them with its full strength. So the only aircraft that the IAF had available in the vicinity was MiG-21 Bison, which is at least a generation older. So this is how these systems, a combination of an aircraft, a good radar, the F-16, the Block 52 F-16s of Pakistan Air Force. Even today, they don't have the ASA radar as it's called. ASA radar is a sexy new thing. ASA stands for Active Electronically Scanned Array Radar. Pakistani F-16s don't have it as yet, but still the radar they have is much more effective than the radar of India's top of the line Sukhoi 30s. Rafale is a different matter. Once again, for India and Indian Air Force, Pakistan is getting clearance for these upgrades, for which they are paying, by the way, is not something to be happy about. It is not something to be alarmed about. Now, I know there will be a lot of Rona Dhona. Look at Americans. How can you trust Americans? They are giving the Pakistanis this. But you know what? When you buy a car, when you buy an aircraft, a Boeing, an Airbus, there is a services contract. Once you buy something from somebody, the other side is also bound to service it. And if the Americans have not done it, Turks would have done it. In fact, Turkey has already been working with Pakistan to upgrade their F-16s. Second, the India-US relationship is of a completely different order right now. India wants to buy F-16s from the Americans. They can buy any number of F-16s. It's just that Indian Air Force, in its own thinking and its own worldview, has now moved beyond this. They've moved to 4.5 or 5th generation aircraft, proper ASA radars. There's an ASA radar being developed domestically in collaboration, I think, with the Israelis, called Uttam radar. All our future fighters will be equipped with that. So we are moving into another environment altogether. So once again, this is not a time to be alarmed. This is a time to take note of what is happening. Also because future conflicts, if at all, are going to be very short and very sharp, like Balakot and after. And you don't want to be caught in any situation once again where you have to send MiG-21 BIS to find Block 52 F-16s armed with AMRAAM missiles. So you need to have enough of your own to have a sufficient punitive capability on Indian side. So those are questions, but some of those are tactical questions. At the strategic and political plane, I would say, and this is opinion, nothing to worry about.